one of my good friends says it's not only a backflip, it's a backflip with a double twist kind of difficulty, to actually do, which is to say, you've got to be able to articulate the single most important goal that you and your team are pursuing.
Are you an entrepreneur seeking financial independence? We'd like to thank our sponsor, Oswego Private Wealth Management, led by Bob Bedritis, with 20 years of Wall Street experience. They offer tailored strategies to meet your unique needs. They provide comprehensive services, including tax mitigation, asset protection, and legacy planning. As a family business, they understand the importance of legacy, and they work closely with family-owned businesses. As a certified exit planner, Bob and his team are known for helping business owners become financially independent of their business. Visit OswegoPrivateWealth.com and schedule a free consultation to secure your financial future.
Welcome to the Measure Success podcast, where we feature top leaders on how they measure success in their business and life. Now, let's learn from their experiences.
This is Carl J. Cox, and welcome to the Measure Success podcast, where we talk with top leaders about effective strategies that inspire success. Today, I am super excited. I can't tell you how much I'm excited today to have one of the authors, Jim Huling, from the 4 Disciplines of Execution. I talk about this and rave about this book so many times. Jim, I've been telling you, I have no idea how many copies I've helped sell for you. Once again, of course, a tiny fraction of all the books that you've sold, but it has been it was a game changer for me when I was at Cascade Strategy deploying strategic implementations. And I read your book as like, oh, you hit on some critical principles. Now I'm going to share just a little bit more bio here before we start talking, Jim. Just for those who perhaps don't know, one of the top consulting gurus and strategy there is in the world. So first of all, he's been listed in LinkedIn as a top executive coaching voice. That's a small thing from a modern perspective. He's author of the #1 worldwide best-selling book, The 4 Disciplines of Execution. He's also been a part of 4DX, global management consultant for Franklin Covey for 13 years. And he's coached over 70,000 people directly, leaders around the world, on helping them develop their skills and mindset needed to succeed. And today, Jim is an executive coach and having a thriving practice and helping to provide passion and leadership for those he's working with. Jim, welcome to the Measure Success podcast.
Carl, thank you so much. In fact, I've been, you and I talked first a few weeks ago. I've been looking forward to this day ever since then. And not only do I love the way you handle the podcast environment, you do your homework, you've got great questions, you're obviously a brilliant leadership coach and dignitary yourself, but I've been really looking forward to seeing how we would put our ideas together and bring something really special to your listeners today. So I can't wait to get started.
No, absolutely. This is going to be fun. We're getting into this because this is going to be a shorter version of our typical Measure Success podcast for those who are been regular listeners, but we're going to get right into this. So let's, of course, and forgive me here, Jim, we got to start with the book because once again, it's a key reason why I wanted to connect with you. Okay, you did 1,500 strategic implementations and you're like, hey, we need to write a book about this. How did you come up with the 4? I'm like, curious, how did you know that there was these 4 concepts that came out that you knew it was, I go back to like good to great. It was like, there was key principles that they figured out behind it. That's what it seems like you learned from these 1,500 strategic implementations. Maybe you could start with first, just real quickly list those 4, for those who don't know what the 4 are. And let's start there.
Okay, well, it's a really easy thing to do. And I'll, if you don't mind, I'll lead into it just for a second by saying, in my whole career, my whole life, I've never heard of anybody else who did it quite this way. It's by far the harder way to do a book is to implement it with thousands and thousands of teams and people all around the world for more than 10 years and then write a book about it. That's really hard to do, But on the other hand, it makes a lot of sense because every time you do an implementation, every time you see what works, every time you see what doesn't work, you have an opportunity to refine the methodology. So by the time Chris and I and Sean Covey sat down to actually put words on paper to say, this is the methodology, it had been tried and tested and refined for more than a decade. So it was, it was this thing that was as good as you could get without investing another decade to try to make it perfect or something. It was in my view, the ideal way to roll out something like this. And I think that's really why it had such a huge success. As you mentioned, it's now in the second edition, and it's translated into 16 languages. I think I've lost track of how many copies have actually been sold, but it's a staggeringly large number. And to this day, it remains on the bestseller list 12 years after its initial publication. It's all a testament to doing something in that thorough way. Now, really quickly, let me introduce everybody to 4 ideas, which are really, as I said to you a moment ago, sort of like 4 of my children. I love every one of these and I love talking about them, but I'll just give you a brief introduction to each one of them. Obviously 4 of them, and everything begins with discipline 1. So discipline 1 is the discipline of focus. And by the way, Carl, this is the hard one for leaders. I mean, right off the bat, we ask you to do the most difficult, challenging thing. One of my good friends says it's not only a backflip, it's a backflip with a double twist kind of difficulty, to actually do, which is to say, you've got to be able to articulate the single most important goal that you and your team are pursuing. And I've said this many times, Carl, if you ask a leader to give you their 10 most important goals, they don't even take a breath. It's effortless. 10, oh yeah, here's 10, here's number 7, 8, 9, 10, no problem. For a lot of leaders, if you say, give me your top 5, they pause a moment, but then they can kind of say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But when you say, put everything else to the side, the single most important outcome you and your team have to produce this year to be successful, everything stops. And usually that's where the work of a great consultant begins, to help you figure out what that is. But it is a painful process. And yet everything that follows is from that beginning. The ability to say, this matters most. Now, I want to be really quick. I want to say discipline 2 really fast, but to say to anybody listening to you and I, we're not saying you have only one goal. We're not saying that. You probably can't run an organization or a big team with one goal, but we are saying one most important, or in the language of 40X, wildly important goal. Well, number 1, what is the one? So you start with that intense focus, which gives you the greatest likelihood of success. Now, discipline 2 is the discipline, we say, of leverage. So discipline 2 is act on the leading measures. And this may not sound like a brand new idea to your ears now, but when we first published this was a very radical thought. The whole world was based on outcomes. Focus on your outcome. Be clear about your outcome. A lot of gurus would say only talk about the outcome that you're after, right? But we were like, well, wait a minute. Outcomes are only produced because of activities or human behaviors that drive that outcome, what we like to call leading measures. We refer to the big goal as a lagging measure because simply you don't know you've done it until you've done it. By the time you get the final result, you should be finished, right? So it definitely lags behind where your vision is. But leading measures, those are right now, today. You and your team, what are the human activities you're doing that drive that outcome? And the thing that makes this one hard is that, again, there's this tendency to say, well, if we're going to increase profitability by 37%, we're going to have to do 75 things. Well, if you ask a team to do 75 things, one thing is certain: they will do none of them well, right? They probably won't even do half of them, but even the half they do, they won't do well. So again, you've got to narrow the focus to the 1 or 2 driving actions that actually make that big number move. That's discipline 2, act on the leading measures. Discipline 3 is one that is so popular now. And Carl, I don't know if you'll believe this, but when we published 40X, it was not popular at all, because we now live in an era of engagement. We live in an era where the leadership mantra for everybody is, how do I get my team engaged? But in the old days, it was, how do I keep my team compliant? How do I get them to do what I told them to do? Today's world is more about, how do I get them to fully engaged and want to do it? But discipline 3 is the discipline of engagement. And it's all about creating an environment where the team feels that the score belongs to them. In the old days, the score belonged to the leader, and all of us were small actors in the great drama of the leader's success, in a way of speaking. The leader got celebrated for the achievement. All the people had to do was work. Well, now that's all reversed, right? In this era of engagement, people want to say, well, why should I care about this? Why should I bring my very best? Why should I stay enthused and passionate about what we're trying to do? Well, Discipline 3 is a system for enabling people to feel that they own that goal, so they will have those attributes in their performance. And then last of all, and if I can pause dramatically, most important of all, Discipline 4, which is create a cadence of accountability. Discipline 4 is the most important discipline because it is the one where you actually follow through on everything you've done in Discipline 1, 2, and 3. So it's about creating an environment where an entire team holds themselves and each other accountable for doing their part every week for achieving the goal. So it sounds really simple. You've heard me say this before. The beautiful thing about 4DX is that it's so simple you could write it on a napkin at lunch. It's not a complex methodology, but it is also not an easy methodology. It takes a lot of, forgive the word, discipline again, to be able to do it. But once you do, well, here we are now where the worldwide results not only speak for themselves, they're frankly kind of overwhelming when you start reading about them from every corner of the world. Leaders and teams achieving extraordinary results by using these 4 simple ideas in a very disciplined way.
That was a brilliant synopsis. You may have taught this a few times. It was tongue in cheek as I say that to 70,000 other people. And I'm so glad you've had a chance to share it again with us today. It's interesting. I was just happening to pull up StrengthsFinder, and you said a couple things that were interesting. Focus. Okay, that is a massive problem. I have the problem, right? I don't want to throw rocks out of a glass house, right? But of course, I'm like you. I'm trying to coach our clients into being more focused. I'm looking at StrengthsFinder top 34 strengths, and it's, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 from the bottom, right? In terms of 7th from the bottom, in terms of likely. What's other interesting is discipline, which you've talked about a number of times, is 4th least likely of some of these strengths. Wow. This is part of the reason why it's so hard, is these are not common strengths for leaders, especially CEOs, right? They like, part of the reason they're successful is they like to do a lot of things and they like to drive towards things, and their discipline, that's just, it's truth. And so that's interesting. One of the things we like to talk about is creating, if you're not disciplined, you're not disciplined, but you can create great habits, right? And I think that's really what you talk about in that phase 4 is like, how do you create these habits, which end up looking like discipline? Once you get to the end of the day, it's like, wow, you're really disciplined. It's like, no, we created really good, consistent habits of how to actually get things done. Now, one of the things that amazed me was when you wrote the second revised edition. I think this was after doing about 5,000 implementations. Mm-hmm. And in the earlier version, you said you really should only be doing 3 things at one time. And you went and revised a new edition. You said you really should do 1 thing at a time. I talk about that. It really messes with people's psyche when I talk about that part around when it comes to focus again. Explain that in a little bit more detail. What was happening when you probably, like in the earlier days, like, hey, we could do 3, but then you turned around. It's like, no, you should really only do 1. Why was it statistically? What was happening in your actual implementations where you got you to there?
Well, I'm so happy to answer it. And I'm so impressed because that's an astute observation of a subtle shift that happened from the first edition to the second edition several years later. And I'll say it in the most honest way I know. In the first edition, we were commonly operating with leaders who had 20, 30, 40 goals, KPIs, MBOs, whatever you wanted to call them. It was like the console of a 747. If you look at their tracking mechanism for all the goals, right? But the reality was they weren't achieving them. In fact, they weren't achieving hardly any of them. They were just, in some cases, playing lip service to them. So initially, to say 3 goals was like shifting the tectonic plates of the earth. It was the most radical thing. And I don't mind telling you, a lot of very well-respected leaders told us we were crazy, that it couldn't be done. Now, one of the small things that is key, though, for anybody listening to you and me today, don't fall in the trap of thinking we're saying only 1 goal. That's not what we're saying. We're saying 1 most important goal. You can still have 10 goals, but only one can be given the special treatment of being the most important, most impactful. Today we like to say breakthrough goal. What is the one that will make your year if you hit it, and everything else will sort of be secondary to that. So I think that was really key when that happened. And then secondly, if you don't mind me closing this thing really quickly, is when we came to the second edition, we realized that we ourselves had held back just a bit, because three was really a compromise. Three was sort of a, let's don't get thrown out of the room in the first 5 minutes by saying one, so let's go with three. It's a little more palatable. And we even said perhaps one is operational, one is financial, and one is strategic, a little bit of science or methodology around that. But in the years that followed the publication of the book, I think all three of us would say if we could go back and white out and rewrite that one section of the original book, we would change it today to be one. And the second edition, as you see, doubles down on the idea of one goal. Only one goal can be the most important goal. Even if you have 10, the other 9 have to be secondary to the one that we like to call wildly important.
I love that. And I love it how you went to there. And so I'm curious, how much more success did you end up seeing when you got your clients to move to the one big thing?
Yeah, phenomenal. It was literally phenomenal. And I didn't prepare for today with the authority to use a lot of company names, but let me just say in general, the largest hotel company in the world achieved the highest guest satisfaction in 35 years by doubling down on the one goal that mattered the most. In that case, it was the experience of the guest. The largest pharmaceutical company in the world doubled down on increasing access to their drugs among people in all demographics and all places in the world. Extraordinary results, highest results ever achieved. And that list now, Carl, and I hope I don't sound braggadocious, as we say in the South, about this, that list of never been achieved before accomplishments around the 4 disciplines is now so long that we've sometimes talked about having a supplemental written document that simply has all of those results in it. It's an extraordinary thing. But if you go all the way back, anybody, you could have taught us this. Anybody could have taught us this in the beginning. It was about believing it, that the fewer things you focus on, the greater the results you'll achieve. And it puts the added pressure on to make sure the choice of what matters most is made with great care, a little bit of art, and maybe a lot of faith. You choose the right thing, and you give it all that focus, you're going to do something extraordinary, almost no matter what you've chosen.
Yeah, I love that. It is really, I've taken that principle to others. It's interesting. There's other ones, once again, of names I can't say some things to. One of the largest, once again, medical companies, I'll say, in the world. And they learned that concept of one thing at a time, and having a project manager do only one thing at a time, as opposed to the typical. When I ask people how many projects should a project manager be doing, they say somewhere between 10 and 50. Right. And it's like, no, one thing. And they're like, that's crazy. That's so expensive. It's like, well, you're missing the point. They're getting it done faster with better quality. It gets done, and then they move on to the next thing. And they actually get done way more than you typically would, because they're absolute focus at one thing at a time. And and is that what you would see regularly too, Jim, as seeing that progress and success?
Absolutely. And one of our clients very famously said, he was a gentleman who had a team with 53 goals. I'll never forget this moment. And I literally, in a moment of innocence, said, 53 goals? How do you ever accomplish 53 goals? True story, hand to heart, Carl. He said to me, he was a British executive of one of the largest companies in Europe. And he said, well, we don't achieve them. We just talk about them a lot, which was a very honest answer. I'm sure he might want to take that answer back publicly, but he was in a very moment of real authenticity. He said, well, the truth is we don't achieve them. We just talk about all of them all the time. And that became sort of a phrase that we used a lot. Are we achieving these goals, or are we just talking about them? If you don't mind, I add a small thing is, we were all in high school. Hopefully we heard some version of the law of diminishing returns. That the more things you try to focus on simultaneously, the less energy you invest in them. Well, that really became an indisputable truth in the implementation of 40X, because any team in the world or any leader in the world only has a certain amount of capacity to invest in something, right? And so if you take that block of capacity and you spread it across 3 things, well, now each thing only gets a third of what it would have gotten originally. And if you spread it across 5 things, each thing only gets 20%. So how can you say that this is one of the most important goals in the company? Yeah, but we've decided to only give it 20% of our energy. That is counterintuitive, isn't it? So there's logic and science a little bit behind this idea of not spreading your energy across too many simultaneous objectives. You can probably do everything. You just can't do everything at once.
Very well said. Okay, I just for a few brief moments, we had a fun conversation about what you're currently doing today. You've gone into executive coaching, and what I love what you said is it's provided you a passion that you never expected, and what you said in pre is like you finally found, so to speak, exactly where you're supposed to be. Just for those who are listening who don't know what you're doing today, if you could give a summary level, and then also just briefly share why this has been such an impactful thing for you.
Thank you, my friend. I'm so honored. I always love talking about the 4 disciplines, but I always feel a little bit like we left out part of the story if I don't say, well, here's what I'm doing now, though, based on that. So really, really briefly, I would say after a wonderful 14 years with Franklin Covey as the global managing consultant for 40X, I've reached a point where I felt my own chapter turning, one chapter of a book gently turning to the new chapter. And I just felt it happening, and I was so wonderfully supported by the great people of Franklin Covey, still the finest organization I've ever been a part of or associated with. And so about 3 years ago, I decided to gracefully retire from day-to-day consulting. Now, I mentioned to you a moment ago, that I had given 600 keynote speeches in 21 countries. So the prospect of never seeing another airplane or hotel was a very happy thought for me. So I was really glad to go to the next chapter. But what really took me to the next chapter was this longing for a deeper connection. I was used to working with senior leadership groups ranging from 100 to, in one case, 10,000. And those are wonderful moments. And you do feel like you're impacting at scale and you're maybe making a difference in the world. Everything about it is good. But there's one thing that is always missing in that kind of scale, and that's the sense of intimacy, the real sense of human to human connection. And maybe at the end, the ability to say, wow, I really made a difference. I can go home tonight saying, I really did something that mattered today. You don't always have that when you work at scale, when you work with large groups. So I was longing for that, Carl. I don't know any other way to say it. I really wanted to see what that kind of life would be like. So for the last 3 years, I've been wonderfully supported building up an executive coaching business. I have 27 senior leaders, some of whom run multi-billion-dollar organizations. The largest one is $100 billion, CEO of $100 billion. But I also have a number of entrepreneurs who are running $10 million businesses and $20 million businesses, and then, of course, a lot of senior leaders in between. So 27 of those people I meet with every single month on one basis of frequency or another. But the key is that every time I'm present, I'm connected, I'm only thinking about them, I'm only pondering how my long experience can be of value in this day to them. And I hope you won't mind me adding that often that's about strategy and about execution, for sure. Often it's about leadership, because almost my whole life was spent in leadership. But I don't think you'll be surprised, Carl, if I say, but about a third of the time, it's about how do you bring work and life together so that you not only have an incredibly rich, successful career, but in the process of having that, you don't bankrupt other parts of your life that also matter to you. And I have a long time of working on that challenge and a book of my own about how to integrate work and life. And so I get to work across those 3 spectrums. But forgive me, I said this to you before, but every time I end a coaching session, without exception, really, I can say to myself, I think I really made a difference today. I think I really helped that person. I think I gave them an idea or an exercise or a thought-provoking assignment to work on that I can go to sleep tonight saying, man, I made a difference in the world. And you don't always have that feeling when you're speaking to a very large audience. You hope you have that feeling, but you don't get the confirmation of it like when you're looking at another person's face and you can see in their eyes that you've really made a difference. So that's what I get to do now with my executive coaching practice. And I jokingly said to you, as I've said several other times, but this time I really mean it, This is what I was born to do. I really feel that today. And mostly it's about using execution to drive a purpose driven outcome. I'm still working with the things that I helped to invent around the four disciplines of execution. But today I add a piece at the end that says execution is fantastic, but it's mostly fantastic when the goal is toward a worthy outcome. It's a meaningful outcome. It's a thing that you're proud of and you want to share with other people. And then you will look back on one day and say, I did something good with my life and my work because here's the things I worked on. It's that kind of feeling. So it's almost like the full completion of something I was reaching for in the four disciplines and now feel like I really have.
Jim, that was very well said. Two quick questions that I like to ask on the MedSuccess podcast before we wrap up here. We're just going to go through today, and because you have business and clearly your personal life intertwined, as you described. You figured out. I never like to use the term balance, but you figured out where is important to spend your time and how to properly allocate that. Today, how are you measuring success?
Yeah, it's a really, really great question. There's two ways I think about this. You've touched on something very personal, so I promise you not a long answer, but one that comes from the heart rather than the mind from me. One, I believe in all the coaching I do, and no matter who I'm with or how long we're together, there's a central question we're always working on, and that question in my vernacular is, what matters most? What matters most in this moment? What matters most in this season of my career? What matters most in the choices I have to make this week between attending my child's ball game or going to a meeting? What matters most? I think that question, while being very familiar to all of your listeners, I feel it right now. I have chill bumps on my arm just articulating. That's how powerful this is. So a lot of my work is around that, and I think that's the main thing. But then a question that most of the people I work with, and remember, they're all 40 plus, they're almost all senior leaders. They're like you, they're high achievers who've accomplished a lot. And almost all of them are looking for the subtle changes to go to the next level. Well, a question that they seem to value a lot is, how do you want to be remembered? So it is one thing in the day-to-day to make the choice that serves your personal purpose, which, by the way, sometimes you got to go to the meeting and you can't make the ball game, but you have to always be asking and answering that question using the compass of your purpose. But then one day, all the meetings will be done. All the activities will be done. All the accomplishments will be done. You'll have moved from that era of success all the way over to the era of significance. And that's when you're going to start to say, well, but has it really mattered? Of all the airplanes and all the hotels and all the long nights and all the work and the energy and the angst of accomplishing what I set out to accomplish, am I now proud and happy with how I spent my life? Or do I carry regret over how I spent my life? Well, I'm the guy that helps people make choices today that they will treasure tomorrow, as opposed to saying, I wish I had a chance to go back and do that differently.
Yeah, well said. Very well said. I loved it. How do you describe that? Okay, one more question, and then a book that you most commonly recommend to your clients.
Gosh. Now, first of all, I'm an avid reader. I have read an average of 4 to 6 books a month for the last 40 years. So you've asked me a question that now you just 40x'd me. I don't know if you realize that, because I'm having in my mind to sort of narrow down. But I will say I'm looking at my most intimate collection is right here on the front edge of my desk. And on the front edge of my desk is, first of all, my copy of the Bible, which is a powerful book that has shaped a lot of things about my life. So there's that. Right next to it, I won't try to twist the camera, that's too much. I have Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. I've read a number of times. I still to this day am humbled by this man whose scope of responsibility outdistanced mine by many leagues, and yet who took the time to write down things that are same questions I'm asking myself today. I think that's powerful. I have a copy of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. You're going to think that one's a little unusual, but it's a story of redemption, and it's a story of second chances, and the opportunity to make things right, even if they didn't start out right. I love that story. Then I have a copy, only two more. I don't want you to be sorry you asked me, of The Alchemist, which is one of my all-time favorite books, top 5 for me. But it's all about following your dreams and finding your quote unquote treasure in very unexpected places. And then last of all is the 4 Disciplines of Execution. So those are the books of all. You can't see my office, but I have several hundred books in my office as a library. Those 6 are standing separately on the edge of my desk. Maybe that means that's something that they're there.
Those are great recommendations, and you get the pass for more than one book, Jim, because those were an excellent description of what you had there. So, Jim, how could people connect and learn more about what you're doing?
Thank you. I'm so honored you would ask that. These days, the best way to find me, and I wish everybody would, if you don't mind me saying that, Carl, is I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn every single day. For the last 3.5 years, I have not missed a day posting some piece of leadership, execution, or life advice. I posted one today that's already been read by 3,000 people. So look for me on LinkedIn, and it's just JIM Huling, so Jim Huling, just my name, nothing fancy. But I'm out there all the time, and that short form writing, like a post requires, is kind of a new discipline for me. The last 3 years, I've been doing it regularly, and I'm finding it really valuable. First of all, it's a healthy discipline to write short, because that's not easy, is it? But it's easier to write a book than it is to write short. But also, so many people are responding, saying that they're getting something from that daily thought. Maybe some greater than others, but that daily thought. So LinkedIn, Jim Huling, you can find me there. I'm on every other social media platform with the same name, JIM Huling. But my principal place today is right there on LinkedIn.
Jim, thank you so much for being a guest on the Measure Success podcast today.
You're so welcome. I hope I get invited back someday.
Oh, that would be an honor, because there is so much I'd love to talk more about you. And everyone else is listening. I hope you've appreciated this. Part of the reason we've been able to continue to grow is because we have great human beings like Jim Huling and the work that he's done. And what we really love is have guests who have that giving heart, that they really want to make a difference in other people's lives. And Jim, you have been a great example of that today. Once again, thank you to you for being on our show.
Yeah. And
to everyone else who's listening, we always like to finish with wishing you the very best and measuring your success. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Measure Success podcast. We'll see you again next time to learn from the best. Remember to subscribe now to get future episodes.